The bouncer's hand clamped down on 23-year-old Nia Thompson's arm with brutal force, yanking her backward from the entrance of Salvatore's, the most exclusive Italian restaurant in Manhattan's Little Italy. Her job application still clutched in her other hand as she stumbled in her modest heels and nearly fell onto the wet sidewalk. The cold November rain was coming down hard, soaking through her carefully pressed blazer within seconds as the massive doorman, a slab of muscle named Tony who had biceps the size of her head, shoved her away from the ornate brass doors with a look of pure disgust on his face. She tried to explain that she had an appointment, that she had received an email confirming her interview time for the hostess position, but Tony just laughed, a cruel sound that cut through the noise of the rain and the evening traffic on Mulberry Street. He told her that Salvatore's didn't hire her kind, that she must have gotten confused or applied to the wrong place, that she should try the diners or fast food joints in her own neighborhood instead of wasting his time at a respectable establishment. The words hit harder than the physical shove had, each syllable dripping with contempt and racism, so casual it was clear he said things like this regularly, without consequence. Nia's hands shook as she tried to pull her blazer tighter against the rain, her natural hair already soaked and dripping, her carefully applied makeup running down her face, her entire body trembling with a mixture of shock, humiliation, and rage that made her throat tight, and her eyes burn with tears she refused to let fall in front of this man. Other people on the street hurried past without stopping, some glancing at the scene but quickly looking away, unwilling to get involved in what was clearly a confrontation between the restaurant staff and someone they assumed must have caused trouble. A couple in expensive coats walked right past Nia as they entered Salvatore's, the woman giving her a brief look of pity mixed with judgment before disappearing through the brass doors that Tony held open for them with a gracious smile that was completely different from the cruel expression he had shown Nia just seconds earlier. She stood there in the rain, her application packet dissolving into a soggy mess in her hands, trying to process what had just happened and figure out what to do next. She had taken 2 buses and the subway to get here from the Bronx, had used the last of her rent money to get her one professional outfit dry cleaned, had spent 3 hours researching the restaurant and preparing for this interview that she desperately needed because her student loans were in default and her landlord had already given her a final notice. The hostess position at Salvatore's paid twice what she could make anywhere else, and the tip pool that hostesses shared with servers at high-end restaurants like this could mean the difference between surviving and drowning in the financial quicksand that had been swallowing her since she graduated from City College 6 months ago with a degree in hospitality management and no job prospects. Nia was about to turn and walk away, to accept this latest humiliation in a long series of rejections and disappointments that had defined her year, when the front door of Salvatore's opened again, and a man stepped out into the rain. He was older, probably in his late 60s, with silver hair slicked back from a weathered face that bore the kind of lines that came from decades of hard living and harder decisions. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nia's rent for 6 months, and he moved with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside even before they consciously registered his presence. Tony the bouncer immediately straightened up, his posture shifting from aggressive to deferential so quickly it was almost comical, and he started to explain that he was just removing someone who didn't belong, that he was handling the situation. But the older man wasn't looking at Tony. He was staring at Nia with an expression that was impossible to read, his dark eyes wide and his face suddenly pale beneath his tan, one hand reaching out slightly as if he had seen a ghost or received a physical blow. His mouth opened but no sound came out, and for several long seconds he just stood there frozen in the rain, oblivious to the water soaking into his expensive suit, staring at this soaked and shaking young black woman as if she were the only person in the world. The moment stretched out, tense and strange, until finally the man spoke in a voice that was rough with some emotion Nia couldn't identify, asking Tony what the hell he thought he was doing and why there was a young woman standing in the rain. Tony started to repeat his explanation about her not belonging, about maintaining standards, but the older man cut him off with a single sharp gesture and a look that made the massive bouncer actually take a step backward. The man asked Nia her name, his voice gentler now but still carrying that undertone of shock or recognition, and when she told him, spelling it out clearly despite her shaking voice, something changed in his expression. He turned to Tony and told him he was fired, effective immediately, to get his things and get out and never come back. And when Tony started to protest, the older man raised his voice just slightly and said something in Italian that made the bouncer's face go white. Tony disappeared into the restaurant without another word, and the older man turned back to Nia, asking her please to come inside, to get out of the rain, telling her that there had been a terrible mistake and that he needed to speak with her. Nia hesitated, confused and wary, not understanding what was happening or why this man was looking at her like he knew her when she had never seen him before in her life. But she was soaked and freezing and had nowhere else to be, so she followed him through the brass doors into the warmth and elegant lighting of Salvator's. The restaurant was exactly as beautiful as its reputation suggested, all dark wood and white tablecloths, and the kind of understated luxury that came from decades of serving New York's elite. The dinner service was in full swing, well-dressed diners enjoying their meals, while suited servers moved efficiently between tables, and every head turned to watch as the soaking wet black woman followed the owner through the main dining room. Nia could feel their stares, could see the confusion and judgment on their faces as they took in her wet clothes and ruined hair and obvious distress, and she wanted to disappear, wanted to run back out into the rain and forget this entire humiliating evening. But the older man, who she was beginning to realize must be Salvatore Russ himself, the legendary restaurant owner and rumored mobster who had run this place for 40 years, kept a gentle hand on her elbow and guided her through the dining room to a private office in the back. He sat her down in a leather chair, draped his own suit jacket around her shoulders despite her protests, and asked one of the servers to bring towels and hot tea immediately. Then he sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly together, and asked her to tell him about herself, about her family, about where she came from. Nia didn't understand why he cared, why he was being so kind after his employee had just thrown her into the street, but something in his expression made her answer honestly. She told him she was 23, that she had grown up in the Bronx with her grandmother after her mother died when she was 5, that she had just graduated from City College with a degree in hospitality management, but couldn't find a job in her field, that she had applied for the hostess position at Salvator's because she needed work desperately, and had always dreamed of working in a high-end restaurant. Salvatore listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face, and when she mentioned her grandmother, he asked for her name. Nia told him her grandmother was Dorothy Thompson, that she had raised Nia alone after Nia's mother had died, that she had passed away herself just 3 months ago, leaving Nia completely alone in the world. The moment she said the name Dorothy Thompson, Salvatore's face transformed, tears actually appearing in his eyes as he leaned back in his chair and whispered something in Italian that sounded like a prayer or a curse. He asked if Nia's mother's name had been Angela, and when Nia nodded, confused about how he could possibly know that, Salvatore stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her, his shoulders shaking slightly. When he turned around, his face was composed again, but his eyes were still wet, and he told Nia a story that would change everything she thought she knew about her family and her past. He explained that 28 years ago, when he was a younger man running this restaurant and deeply involved in activities that he wasn't proud of now, he had fallen in love with a woman named Angela Thompson. She was a black woman, a jazz singer who performed at clubs around the city, and their relationship had been passionate and real, but also impossible given the times, and the people Salvatore was connected to. His family, his associates, The entire world they lived in had been violently opposed to the relationship, had threatened Angela, had made it clear that she would never be safe as long as she was with him. Salvatore had been a coward, he said with bitter self-recrimination, had let the pressure and the threats push him away from the woman he loved, had ended things with Angela even though she was pregnant with his child. He had given her money, had tried to make provisions for her and the baby, but Angela had refused his help, had told him she wanted nothing from a man who would abandon his own family to keep the peace with criminals and racists. He had spent the next 28 years trying to find her, trying to make things right, but Angela had disappeared completely, had changed her name and her life to protect herself and her daughter from the dangerous world Salvatore inhabited. Nia sat frozen in the leather chair, the towel forgotten in her lap, as she processed what Salvatore was telling her. He was saying he was her father, that her mother Angela had been his lover, that he had abandoned them before Nia was even born. She thought about her grandmother Dorothy, who had raised her with love, but also with a bitterness about Nia's father that she had never fully explained, only saying that he was a dangerous man who had broken Angela's heart and that they were better off without him. She thought about her mother, who she barely remembered but who her grandmother had described as a beautiful singer with a voice like honey and a spirit that couldn't be broken by the racism and hardship of her time. She thought about the fact that she had spent her entire life believing her father had simply abandoned them without a second thought, never knowing that there was a more complicated story underneath. And she thought about this man sitting across from her, this wealthy restaurant owner with rumored mob connections, claiming to be the father who had been absent her entire life and who apparently hadn't known she existed or where to find her until she had literally shown up on his doorstep looking for a job. Salvatore seemed to sense her shock and confusion, and he moved slowly, carefully, pulling out his wallet and removing an old, faded photograph that he handed to her with shaking hands. The photo showed a younger Salvatore, maybe in his late 30s, with his arm around a stunningly beautiful black woman with high cheekbones and bright eyes and a smile that lit up the frame. Nia's breath caught because she had seen this woman before in pictures her grandmother had kept, had been told this was her mother Angela at the height of her singing career. But she had never seen this particular photo, had never seen her mother looking so happy and in love, and had certainly never seen the man she was with who was unmistakably the same person sitting across from her now, just decades younger. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, was written, "Angela and Sal, 1995. Nia's hands trembled as she held the photo, evidence that this impossible story might actually be true, that the father she had never known might be sitting right in front of her after 23 years of absence. She asked why he hadn't tried harder to find them, why he had let 28 years go by without knowing his own daughter, and Salvatore's face crumpled with genuine pain as he explained that he had tried, had hired investigators and reached out to old contacts and searched every way he knew how, but Angela had been smart and careful and had made sure he couldn't find her. By the time he learned that she had died, that there was a daughter he had never met, Dorothy had already moved and disappeared again, protecting her granddaughter from a man she saw as nothing but danger. That mistake, that moment of cowardice 28 years ago when Salvatore had chosen his business and his reputation over the woman he loved and the child they had created, had cost him everything that mattered. He had built an empire, had made millions, had earned respect and fear from some of the most powerful people in New York, but he had spent nearly 3 decades alone, without family, without love, haunted by the memory of what he had lost. He had never married, had never had other children, had poured all his energy into his restaurant and his business dealings while living with the constant ache of knowing that somewhere out there was a woman who hated him and a child who would never know him. And now, by some twist of fate or divine intervention, his daughter had walked through his door on a rainy November evening, had been thrown out by his own employee, had nearly disappeared back into the city before he saw her, and recognized in her face the unmistakable features of the woman he had loved and lost. The resemblance was striking once you knew to look for it. The same high cheekbones and bright, intelligent eyes, the same curve of the mouth and set of the shoulders. Angela's beauty and spirit alive in this young woman who had grown up without knowing her father existed. Nia didn't know what to feel or how to process this information, her mind spinning with questions and emotions that ranged from anger to grief, to a desperate, reluctant hope that maybe this meant she wasn't alone in the world after all. She asked Salvador how she could trust anything he was saying, how she could know this wasn't some kind of scam or manipulation, and he nodded as if he had expected the question. He offered to take a DNA test immediately, to prove biologically that he was her father, and he also offered to show her documents and photos and letters he had saved from his time with Angela, evidence of their relationship and his desperate attempts to find her over the years. But more than that, he asked what he could do to prove himself to her now, how he could begin to make up for 23 years of absence even though he knew it was impossible to truly compensate for that loss. Nia was quiet for a long time, looking at the photo of her young mother with this man, thinking about her grandmother's protectiveness and her mother's early death and the years of struggle she had endured alone. Finally, she told Salvador that she didn't know if she could forgive him for abandoning her mother, didn't know if she wanted a relationship with a father who had been absent her entire life, but that she was willing to talk, to learn more, to see if there was any possibility of building something from the ruins of what should have been. Salvador's relief was visible, his entire body relaxing as if a weight had been lifted, and he thanked her with a sincerity that seemed to surprise even him. He asked if she would join him for dinner, if they could talk more and begin the long process of getting to know each other. And Nia agreed, still wary but also hungry for information about her mother and her past. They moved from the office to a private dining room where Salvador ordered what seemed like half the menu, expensive Italian dishes that Nia had only read about in her hospitality textbooks. As they ate, Salvador told her stories about her mother, about Angela's talent and beauty and fierce independence, about how she had refused to compromise herself or her dignity for anyone, including him. He talked about the world he had lived in back then, the criminal activities he had been involved with that had made a relationship with Angela impossible, and the gradual process of going legitimate and distancing himself from that life over the past 2 decades. He owned the restaurant cleanly now, he said, along with several other businesses that were completely above board, having spent years extracting himself from the dangerous world that had cost him his family. Nia listened, asking questions and sharing her own memories of what her grandmother had told her about her mother, piecing together a fuller picture of the woman who had given birth to her and died too young. She learned that Angela had been diagnosed with cancer when Nia was 4, that she had fought it for a year before succumbing, and that she had made Dorothy promise never to contact Salvador or let him know about Nia because she believed his world was too dangerous for a child. Dorothy had kept that promise even after Angela's death, had raised Nia with love and limited resources, had worked multiple jobs to keep them fed and housed, and had died of a heart attack 3 months ago, leaving Nia alone and struggling. Salvador listened to all of this with tears streaming down his face, grieving for the woman he had loved and the years he had missed with his daughter, angry at himself for the choices that had led to this loss. When Nia mentioned her current situation, her unemployment and debt, and the eviction notice she had received just last week, Salvador immediately offered to help, to pay off her debts and find her a place to live and give her a job at the restaurant. Nia's first instinct was to refuse, her pride and independence inherited from her mother and grandmother making her resistant to accepting help, especially from a father who had never been there before. But Salvador explained that this wasn't charity, that she was his daughter, and he had 23 years of support to make up for, that helping her now was the bare minimum of what he owed her and her mother's memory. He also offered her the job she had originally come for, the hostess position, but suggested that if she was serious about a career in hospitality management, he could offer her something better. He needed someone to help him modernize the restaurant's operations, someone with current training in hospitality management and fresh ideas about how to attract younger customers while maintaining the elegance and tradition that made Salvatore special. It would be a real position with real responsibilities and a salary that reflected her education and abilities. Not a handout, but an actual opportunity to build the career she had studied for. The offer was generous, possibly too generous, and Nia knew that accepting it would mean accepting Salvatore into her life in a way that she wasn't sure she was ready for. But she also knew that she was out of options, that her rent was 3 months overdue, and her student loan creditors were threatening legal action, and that this opportunity was more than she could have hoped for when she had stepped off the bus in Little Italy just hours ago, expecting nothing more than a minimum wage hostess job. She told Salvatore she would accept the job on the condition that she would be treated like any other employee, that she would have to prove herself and earn her position rather than being given special treatment because of their relationship. She also told him that she wanted to move slowly in building a personal relationship, that she needed time to process everything and decide what role, if any, she wanted him to play in her life beyond being her employer. Salvatore agreed to all of her conditions without hesitation, just grateful for the chance to have his daughter in his life in any capacity. They finished their dinner, and Salvatore called his driver to take Nia home to the Bronx, pressing an envelope into her hands as she left and telling her it was an advance on her first month's salary to help with her immediate expenses. When Nia opened the envelope in the car, she found $10,000 in cash and nearly dropped it in shock. But when she tried to text Salvatore to tell him it was too much, he simply replied that it was what he owed her for 23 missed birthdays and Christmases, and that she should use it without guilt. Nia started working at Salvatore's the following Monday, walking through the brass doors that she had been thrown out of just days earlier, now as an employee with a real salary and responsibilities. The staff treated her with cautious respect, clearly aware that she had some special connection to Salvatore but not knowing the full story. Tony the bouncer was gone, fired just as Salvatore had promised, and Nia learned from the other employees that several people had been let go in the wake of that evening, Salvatore making it clear that discrimination and disrespect would not be tolerated in his establishment. Nia threw herself into her work, using her education and natural abilities to analyze the restaurant's operations and suggest improvements to everything from the reservation system to the menu layout to the staff training protocols. Salvatore gave her real authority to implement changes, backing her up when longtime employees resisted and making it clear that her ideas should be taken seriously. Within 3 months, Salvatore's had seen a 15% increase in younger customers and a 20% increase in overall revenue, and Nia had earned the genuine respect of the staff, who had initially been skeptical of her rapid rise. But the professional relationship was easier to navigate than the personal one, and Nia struggled with how to feel about Salvatore as a father. He was kind and generous, treating her with a gentleness that suggested he was desperate to make up for lost time. But there was still anger and resentment in her heart for the years he hadn't been there, for the struggles her mother and grandmother had faced alone. She attended dinners at his apartment, met some of his old friends who were clearly part of the world he claimed to have left behind, and learned more about both his legitimate businesses and his complicated past. She discovered that despite his claims of going straight, Salvatore still had connections to organized crime, still commanded respect and fear from people who operated on the wrong side of the law, though he swore he was no longer actively involved in criminal activities. This knowledge made Nia uncomfortable, reminding her of why her mother and grandmother had wanted to keep her away from him. But she also saw the genuine care he showed her, and the ways he was trying to be a better man than he had been in his youth. 6 months into working at Salvatore's, Nia had transformed both the restaurant and her own life. She had paid off her debts, moved into a nice apartment in a safer neighborhood, and built a career that was advancing faster than she had ever imagined possible. She had also built a cautious but real relationship with Salvador, calling him Sal instead of father, but accepting him as family in a way that felt both strange and right. And then everything changed again when a man walked into Salvador's one evening, a man Nia recognized from news reports as Vincent Marconi, one of the most powerful mob bosses in New York and someone that Salvador had supposedly cut ties with years ago. Vincent asked to speak with Salvador privately, and the tension in the restaurant was immediate and palpable, staff members exchanging worried glances as the two men disappeared into the back office. Nia tried to focus on her work, seating customers and managing the floor, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen, that the dangerous world Salvador claimed to have left was about to crash back into their lives. When Salvador emerged from the office an hour later, his face was pale and his hands were shaking, and he asked Nia to come speak with him privately. In his office, with the door closed and his voice low, he explained that Vincent had come to call in an old debt, to ask for Salvador's help with something that would pull him back into the criminal world he had been trying to leave. Salvador had refused, had told Vincent that he was out of that life and wouldn't be pulled back in. But Vincent had made it clear that refusal wasn't an option, that Salvador's past didn't just disappear because it was inconvenient. And worse, Vincent had seen Nia on the restaurant floor and had asked about her, his interest in Salvador's daughter making it clear that she could become leverage if Salvador continued to refuse. The threat was implicit but unmistakable, and Salvador was terrified, realizing that his past had put his daughter in danger just as it had put her mother in danger all those years ago. He told Nia she needed to leave, to go somewhere safe until he could resolve the situation, but Nia refused, angry that after finally finding her father she might lose him again to the same criminal world that had separated him from her mother. That night, after the restaurant closed, Salvador sat Nia down and told her the full truth about his past, about the things he had done and the people he had hurt, about the violence and criminality that had defined his younger years. He explained that he had been trying to go legitimate not just for himself, but because he had never stopped hoping that someday he might find his daughter and want to be someone she could be proud of. But the past didn't let go easily, and men like Vincent Marconi didn't accept that people could just walk away from the life. Salvador said he would handle the situation, would find a way to protect Nia while also keeping Vincent satisfied. But Nia could see the fear and resignation in his eyes, could tell that he was preparing to sacrifice himself or his principles to keep her safe. She thought about her mother, who had died protecting Nia from this exact situation, and about her grandmother, who had spent her life keeping Nia away from dangerous men and dangerous worlds. And she made a decision that surprised both of them, telling Salvador that she wasn't running, that she was tired of the women in her family being driven away by men who couldn't control their own lives, and that they would figure this out together or not at all. The resolution came in a way that none of them expected, when Nia used her business training and natural intelligence to find a solution that didn't require violence or capitulation. She researched Vincent Marconi's business interests and discovered that he was heavily invested in several restaurant and hospitality ventures that were struggling due to poor management and outdated practices. She proposed to Salvador that they offer Vincent a legitimate business partnership, using Nia's expertise to turn around his failing restaurants in exchange for Vincent leaving Salvador alone and clearing the old debt. It was risky, requiring her to interact directly with a dangerous criminal and potentially compromising her own integrity. But it was also a way forward that didn't require Salvador to return to his old life or put either of them in physical danger. Salvador was initially resistant, not wanting to expose Nia to Vincent's world at all, but she insisted, arguing that she had as much right to protect their family as he did, and that she was offering a solution that could benefit everyone involved. The meeting with Vincent Marconi was tense and intimidating, Nia sitting across from a man she knew had ordered murders and destroyed lives, pitching him a business proposal with her hands shaking but her voice steady. She showed him detailed analyses of his restaurant holdings, explained exactly where they were losing money and how she could fix it, and proposed a consulting arrangement that would give her a percentage of the improved profits in exchange for her expertise. Vincent was skeptical at first, amused by the idea of taking business advice from a 24-year-old woman. But as Nia walked him through her plans and demonstrated her knowledge, his amusement turned to interest. He asked hard questions, and she answered them all, proving that she understood not just hospitality management, but also the unique challenges of running businesses that needed to appear legitimate while serving other purposes. By the end of the meeting, Vincent had agreed to her proposal, impressed enough by her intelligence and courage to accept her solution and clear Salvador's debt in exchange for her services. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and it tied Nia to Vincent's world in ways that made her uncomfortable, but it protected Salvador and gave her a way to use her abilities to create something positive out of a dangerous situation. Over the next year, Nia transformed Vincent's struggling restaurants into profitable ventures while also maintaining and growing Salvador's, becoming one of the most sought-after hospitality consultants in New York. She worked hard to keep her involvement with Vincent's businesses strictly professional and legitimate, refusing to be involved in anything illegal and walking away from situations that crossed ethical lines. Vincent respected her boundaries more than she had expected, appreciating her results enough to keep their relationship focused on business rather than trying to pull her deeper into criminal activities. And through it all, her relationship with Salvador deepened and healed, the crisis with Vincent actually bringing them closer together as they learned to trust and protect each other. Salvador officially introduced her as his daughter to everyone in his life, throwing a party at the restaurant where he stood up and told the whole story of how he had found her, tears streaming down his face as he said that being thrown out of his restaurant was the best thing that had ever happened to her because it had brought her back to him. Nia thought often about that rainy November evening when Tony had thrown her into the street, when she had stood soaking and humiliated outside the brass doors of Salvador's, believing she had hit rock bottom. That moment of cruelty and rejection had actually been the beginning of everything changing, leading her to a father she had never known, a career beyond what she had imagined, and a future that was complicated but also full of possibility. She thought about her mother Angela and her grandmother Dorothy, about the sacrifices they had made and the reasons they had kept her away from Salvador, and she understood their choices even as she forged her own path forward. She kept photos of both women on her desk at the restaurant, reminders of where she came from and what she had survived, and she made sure that everything she built honored their memory even as she created something new. The little black girl who had been thrown out in the rain had walked back through those doors as someone powerful in her own right, not because of her father's money or connections, but because of her own intelligence, courage, and refusal to be defined by other people's limitations and prejudices.